a world of constant change and innovation, trust is key, knowledge is power, and the inside track is everything. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bruce Whitfield.
And it's a real proper inside track today because we've got some of Broll's experts joining us to talk to us about specific sectors in the property market and just how they're doing, including this growing trend, and it's a long overdue trend, of taking abandoned office space and converting it into residential accommodation. Joining us today, the experts from Broll's own team. So you're going to get some really good insights on residential, and that'll come from Andre Potgieter. And then Luanda Kotla-Lemaje, who's also going to be talking to us about not only retail and offices, but this growing trend of converting offices into accommodation as well. And that's a long overdue trend. Luanda, you've come out of the banking sector. You've gone from senior banking into senior broking. Why did you make the change?
Well, sometimes I think our path is not defined by us, but, there's a default somewhere in the universe that just chooses us into where we go.
Yeah. Why the auction space? I mean, I'm sure that the world is your oyster. Why have you gone into auctions? What do you see as the opportunity?
All right, so it's been after years of deliberation, and I've often been, in conversation with the management of Broll Auctions and Sales. And it's always been that sector that I never wanted to be in because I was dreading the idea of sitting under an umbrella somewhere trying to sell properties. And, and then I was told that, no, silly, that's not how it works. This is how big the market is. And also looking at the type of clients that I've been servicing throughout my years of banking, it was such a nice bridge to actually get over because, I didn't have to change much, but I just had to change my sales pitch.
So from under an umbrella to under the hammer, I'm not too sure which one is scarier. Now you've got a whole bunch of arrows in your quiver. Talk about retail and the opportunities in retail. We know, you look at any retail sales figures, you look at any data points, retail is really, really struggling. The South African economy, although we're seeing a possibly 5% growth rate this year, isn't recovering in a real sense to anything resembling what it was like in January 2020. So the retail space, is that presenting lots of opportunities at the moment?
I believe it is, and it depends on the side that you're looking at it. As an investor, I think there's still great opportunities to look at retail. Yes, retail has been hit hard through the years. And we've seen a whole lot of, initiatives that came from the government trying to help out, the property players. But retail is something that will never go away, even if we have had so much, in this year, especially with the looting. We look at, the history of where New York was in 1975, and it's exactly what South Africa is actually going through right now. So that mold is going to be broken. There's lots of investments that's coming in. Our president is actively involved with the Sazria Fund, and that has actually lifted up, that burden from the investors. And I think there's still a great angle to work at and still grow that market.
I need to challenge you on New York because, yes, 1975, there was a book called Run, Baby, Run by a gangster called Nicky Cruz, and he described in great detail of just what a hellhole New York City was in those days. And in so many of our CBDs and smaller towns, they are literally hellholes. But there was a very deliberate strategy by not only New York City, but other cities around the world to get policing sorted, to get infrastructure investment going into these city centers, to encourage investment to come back. Are we seeing the early stages of that sort of level of high-level intervention to make sure that our city centers not only survive, but actually stand a chance at thriving?
I believe so. We have, being Broll, we come across a, plethora of investment companies. And we've seen, the little bit that has been done by, the funding companies to revive the city. I've had an opportunity to work with the Department of Economic Development. And I've seen the whole regeneration strategy being built from scratch and to where it is right now. So I guess, everything comes with stages. And yes, the road to get to where we want to see the CBD becoming is quite long, but we can already see the changes happening.
Anybody senior in Standard Bank no longer works in town. They work in Rosebank. Anglo American recently announced it was shutting down after decades its Main Street complex, that huge Anglo American complex so just before the bypass, the M2 bypass in Joburg, that they're moving out of there and moving to Rosebank. We've seen waves of capitulation of companies giving up on the city centre of the CBD. Is that an accurate view, giving up on the CBD, or is it simply opening up new opportunities?
I think it is a pity that we see these giants leaving the CBD because they are the ones who have been able to keep such a great picture of what the city can look like. And a lot of companies have actually emulated their strategies in keeping up with the city structures. But also it opens up new avenues for new players. Now we have buildings that are available that you don't have to invest so much money into, but you can actually pick up where they have left off, and so much can still be done with the buildings that they're leaving behind, because they're leaving like monumental and very beautiful buildings, yeah.
We've seen some very, very successful apartment conversions so far, and I think that opportunity has been accelerated by COVID because so many people have changed the way they work, and there'll be more work from home into the future, and therefore the less need for office space. And certainly in Cape Town, for example, we've seen a huge utilization of old office buildings and conversions, the old Mutual building, for example, into beautiful apartment living. The hospitality sector is making a comeback as well, Luanda. The hospitality sector just doing better and better. We've seen share prices of the large hotel groups beginning to move South Africa off the UK red list. That's bringing in a sense of hope. But before the hope came, there was quite a lot of capitulation. What sort of deal flow are you seeing in the hospitality sector?
All right, there's quite a number of hotels which are being sold, lodges, B&Bs, and I imagined with everything that has hit South Africa, we were not going to have investors for quite a while. But most of the money that you see flowing into the country is from the UAE, from the UK, and from the Americans as well. And they are funding some of the BE property portfolios that we see in South Africa. So I think from that perspective, I believe that it's actually gaining its momentum again. And,
well, that's at least sorry.
And something that I almost forgot is that some of the bigger houses are actually helping some of the small hospitality industry that has been hugely affected. They are helping them with the branding. So they help them to rebrand in their own name so that they can help with the economies of scale. So I think on its own, it just shows you how South Africans, they can pull together to try to save a certain market that has been hugely affected.
It happens all the time, and we are seeing exactly that coming through very, very strongly. Andre Potgieter, to you, residential property and auctions. A lot of people looked down on auctions a decade ago, and it's actually becoming a lot more commonplace, I think, to use the auction mechanism as a way of securing a speedy, transparent, and hopefully more seamless sale than showing your house and sitting under the umbrella that Luanda doesn't want to sit under for months on end and allowing strangers to traipse about your house. The auction is quick and should be fairly simple.
Bruce, yes, it should be. There's been a massive move, and you see across all the suburbs auction boards of residential properties going up. So I think your seller and your purchaser base are all lean in and not anti-it anymore. I think there was a lot of fear where people felt it was always a distressed sale. There was always a a massive reason for sale. All it is bringing a serious seller and a serious buyer together. So
And how much of it is sort of bargain basement hunting, and people saying clearly the sellers are desperate, therefore I'm going to go in there, put in a cheeky offer. If I get it, I get it. If I don't, I don't. How much of that sort of activity is there?
I think there's a fair amount of that still. It's always going to be. Buyers always want to buy well, sellers always want to sell well. So I think it's always going to be there, but fair market trade will get to a certain level. If you've got a few people up against each other, where they all tap out and one person wins, it shows fair value. So I think the brain behind it is changing. Buyers are really more open to it. They are communicating. Sellers are actually opening up to it, knowing that there's you start traditionally in selling, and you end with a date, hopefully. So your time frame can be shortened.
How are sellers establishing a base price? How are they establishing that reserve price beneath which they will not go? Many of the sellers, of course, will be institutions, banks that have repossessed houses. They don't want properties in possession. So they'll have a fairly good idea of the baseline. But for individuals who want to use the mechanism, how are they sort of figuring out what prices they should be charging?
So I think it comes to our expertise, and I think where we stand and how we've traditionally got to our values. You have to compare apples with apples when determining values on properties. Properties are a highly emotional purchase as opposed to a commercial where it's a business and it's a financial purchase. So when it comes to the emotion, you can never really place a value on an individual's emotion. That's why the same properties might well sell for different levels. But when determining values, you have to be in residential, you have to show your client and prove to them, this is your competition, this is what has sold recently that's similar to yours. And play with those numbers and say, this is where we believe you're going to get. If they buy onto that, we determine their value, and we go for it from there.
How many buyers are turning up at auction? I mean, have you got a disproportionate number of properties to buyers? Is there a balance? How do you assess the health of the auction business?
So no, I'm not noticing a mass amount of buyers. I'm noticing serious buyers. So you might well have 2 people going after one property. You might have 5 people going after one property. It all depends on who your inquiries come from, who you find for that property, who shows interest at the time. So there isn't a definitive number. I can't say there's a line of people outside waiting to come and bid. But there's definitely an upswing of people's openness to an auction and to fair trade.
What is selling? I mean, what is actually moving? When you get a particular asset on your books and you go, excellent, that'll be gone by Monday, brilliant, and off you go. What's that property?
Quite a tough question. So I believe anything that shows good value will go. Water finds its level at the end of the day. And in each sector, in each area, let's say there's a specific area, I believe the ones that are moving the most are the ones that are in the average of that area. Those are the easiest to sell. So if, for example, your Bryanston market, where your average is 4.5 million rand, and you get 10 properties in that, you're going to find more interest. But when you bring in a 40, 50 million rand property, obviously your South African public, there's a small percentage that can actually have affordability for that. So I find that in each area, regardless of where it is, I find the average in that area is selling the best.
Lwanda, talk to me about the growing trend and this wonderful evolution of properties. And we've seen it happen to a huge degree in downtown Johannesburg, where there have been conversions of old office buildings into very successful real estate developments, where residential real estate developments. And I think that trend is growing. We've seen, and I mentioned it last time, the PwC building and many, many others finding themselves in conversion stage.
Yeah, we see a couple of hotels in the CBD also changing from being hospitality to to accommodation, like to student accommodation. And I mean, the nice thing that I like about the trends is how the digital space is actually meeting these properties, and they try to attract young people who can actually use those properties to their full extent. I mean, one of the properties that I've been in was where a young lady invited me to come have coffee with her. They have like a restaurant at the ground floor. So this restaurant, they also have like a business center where now they can do their own schoolwork. And they also, what I found nice was the studio. They have a studio where they can actually create some of their podcasts. So they talk to other students and they tell them how great the building that they're in is all about. And I think it becomes an easy sell because most of the times we've really didn't want to touch digital. I mean, I know I'm not a techno-friendly person. I always tell my kids that, listen, call me, don't ask me to do anything else with the phone because I don't like exploring. But it's amazing how when you see things firsthand, you quite identify and you're thinking, if I had this opportunity when I was young, this is what I could have done with this space. This is what I could have done. So yeah, I think walking through the city is not such a pleasant thing, but once you get into the buildings, you realize how it's a different world from how you see all the hawkers in the streets.
And particularly the old hotel buildings, and I'm not sure which buildings are being converted, but I mean, iconic names like the Landrost, which was in Yeovil, the Carlton Hotel, which was an absolutely legendary building. I'm sure that's up for refurb at some point. It's not likely to go back to a hotel, is it? At least they've got the plumbing, and they've got the proportions and the rooms, and you can create great studio flats with ensuite bathrooms, and you can attach kitchenettes into the plumbing services. You're not having to do massive structural work in those ones.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. So, and I think most of these old buildings, they are, it's a great space for student housing. And for residential, sometimes it becomes a bit of an issue, especially with the parking, because you can't get a good parking in the basement. And I see, I mean, students, they drive together, they Uber, and I think that is the new way of living and embracing our new world. So yeah, I think there's still a lot of trends that we are yet to see, and we just need to embrace it.
It's such a pity, Andre, the sort of description that Luanda paints of the areas around the buildings and the failure of municipalities, the failure of local governments in terms of safety and security and bylaws to keep the environment attractive. And I can't help but think that at some point in the future, as you know, there's some streets in Hillbrow, for example, you walk down them and buildings have been renovated beautifully and the streets are kept up really, really nicely. You go around a corner and they're derelict buildings, captured buildings, or hijacked buildings. The state was captured, the buildings were hijacked. And the road there is dodgy and horrible. And it just strikes me that in a systematic way, we can do inner city improvements to a point which benefits not only the property owners, but the residents of those properties too, if they're renting.
Yes, Bruce, you're quite right, is that, neighborhoods change constantly, and unfortunately, infrastructure hasn't been maintained as well as we would have hoped in the streets. There's no reason it can't get back to it. This inner city revival has been going on for the best out of 20 years. You look at how Newtown back in the early 2000s, how that revival came around, and there were many apartment blocks that were bought and renovated and did very well. You don't hear too much of it, but there's certainly is that revival going on, particularly in the CBDs. And yeah, it would be a shame if those buildings are lost completely.
And we see...
No, absolutely. I mean, sorry, Luanda, yes.
So I was saying we also see a great portion of cleaning up the city. It's just that there are those areas which are overly saturated, and it makes it difficult. I mean, some of these hawkers, they don't even know how to keep their own little stall clean, and it becomes an unending problem for the city.
No, look, it's a constant battle. I mean, there are plenty of very attractive buildings in Sandton, and that's another CBD. We're talking about the downtown Joburg CBD now, but I can't help but think that the shape of certainly the old Randburg CBD, the shape of the CBD of Sandton is going to change along with this change that's happening in the way in which we treat officers. Luanda?
You know, in terms of the Randburg area, I'm going to be very honest. I haven't done much work in the Randburg area, but I have passed.
I thought you were about to be terribly rude about Randburg. I was going to say,
you know, I don't like offending people. Yes, but I have seen, I mean, from the glance, I mean, Randburg used to be one of those most respectable areas. I mean, when we were growing up, one of my auntie used to live in Randburg. And I thought, wow, what a great area to live in. But now I think with the mismanagement of properties and also with hijackers also of these buildings, it has made it, and I wish hijackers had some sort of a way of upkeeping the standards, even when they've hijacked it, because they still do have like income. They still take some money from the people who are residing in those properties. It's not like people are living there for free, but the list is, they could just put a little bit of paint.
I think it's wishful thinking.
Here and there. It can be done.
Some lords are not known for their charitable work, unfortunately. Give me a sense of your feeling about it, though. Who are the buyers of these properties? Are these individuals who are coming to auction and saying, I want that apartment in that northwest corner because that gets the best sunsets? Or is it groups? Are we seeing businesses come in and saying, we're going to take out the entire building and we're going to run a rental pool ourselves? What is the mix of buyers there, Andre?
Sorry, yeah. I haven't had much to do with it, but the talk within the office is guys are always looking for office blocks. There are quite a few investors around that are looking to take a whole block, renovate it, and run that as part of their property portfolios. You know, so I believe there are quite a few people like that around. So the need is not necessarily for an individual apartment in each block there, but more so an entire building. And I think that's why. That's why I believe a lot of these the commercial buildings are being bought up and turned into that, so someone can own the whole building.
Yeah, I think the model has been shown to work in Hillbrow very effectively, Luanda, in terms of getting companies in, and the companies then are professional managing agents, and off they go. And you can get some fairly decent returns, I think, on this sort of residential dwelling.
Absolutely. And I mean, we see a number of players. I mean, we see funds who have a portfolio strategy, and they can tell you, okay, this is what we're looking for in this area. We have upcoming property portfolio guys who have received their funding. Most of the time they never disclose who the investor is, but we have those who we are seeing in the city trying to buy some buildings. We have individuals who have made their money overseas and they say, okay, fine, I'm looking to start, but I don't want anything that's going to be too expensive for me, but they will give us the size of the ticket that they're looking for, and we will help guide them in terms of where they could actually buy what they want in their portfolio. And I mean, some of the big companies are very helpful as well. I mean, you look at your Growth Point, your Group 5, there's a whole lot of them. They are encouraging young people to set up, and they are able to support them in terms of looking for those properties in the CBD.
Look, I think we're at a very exciting time. I think there's always a huge amount of apprehension around election times in South Africa, because you don't quite know which way the vote is going to fall, and that affects people's moods and outlooks. But I think there's Andre, certainly it seems like there's quite a lot of vibrancy across the property market at the moment, particularly in more affordable segments.
I'd say so, absolutely. The supply and demand always plays a factor in this. And I think in your more affordable areas, those, if I'm looking at the upmarket buyers and the lower market buyers, your upmarket guys, a lot of the times why that market's holding back at the moment is, unfortunately, people are looking elsewhere. They're worried about investing large amounts. But your general lower market, they're not going anywhere. And it's affordable at the moment. The interest rates at the level it's at, it becomes really affordable for these guys to get into the property market and to purchase their first home. So yes, the affordable market is doing really nicely.
And what are you seeing in terms of the willingness of banks to lend, Luanda? Just how open are they to first-time buyers, people who have got themselves into a profession, into a job, or that sort of thing? Is there support?
There's a huge amount of support, but unfortunately, you have to go through the whole loopholes and processes. And I see some of the, all right, so this year being what it was, the banks have even said, listen, we're not looking to fund anyone that is looking to buy a vacant land. So if you're buying a vacant land, you're on your own. So they focused their fund to do something more substantial than just vacant land. So if you wanted to build anything, buy the land, bring it in as your equity, and then the bank will actually help you to fund whatever the infrastructure that you're looking for. So the banks as well, they will guide. I see them guiding a whole lot of youngsters who are also trying to set up some of the funds that I have been talking to, I've been trying to figure out, so where do you get your funding from? So they will tell me they have maybe international investor, or they've got an old money property company that has been funding them. But they have to sit with the bank, and the bank will say, okay, fine, we'll fund 60% of that. You have to bring in the 40. So depending on the type of the asset that is being funded, the bank usually gives you guidance in terms of what type of a loan to value they will give you. So yes, there's a lot of activity.
Thank you, Luanda. Luanda Tlotlamaje, thank you very much indeed. It's been good to have you on. And also from Broll, Andre Potgieter, expert in residential property. Fascinating insights on this edition of Inside Track into the state, not only of the residential property market, but also retail and hospitality, and how much of that hospitality property is being converted into affordable residential. The shape of our cities, the shape of our spaces is changing, and hopefully that change is for the better. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.